And I'll get us going here on Zoom too. Okay, welcome everybody. Just going to wait a moment here for people to come into the Zoom room. Welcome to everyone who's watching on YouTube, on CCTV. Welcome to the Friday webinar. I'm CC Executive Director Derek Auger, and welcome to the Friday webinar. We do this almost every Friday. We're going to take next Friday off because it's Good Friday, it's a holiday, and we all deserve a little break and a long weekend at this time of the year as we wait for spring to arrive in the western half of the continent anyway, it seems. I think the eastern half is starting to recognize spring a little bit. Thanks to everyone for joining us. This is sort of a continuation of what George and Chris provided for us last week, but they're going to move on to Christopher's Duet collections, Microjazz Duet collections, and they're going to feature those through the SuperScore app. And I think you're going to enjoy what you hear today in this repertoire session. 2 Fridays from now, we're going to resume with Deborah Wanless, a Canadian publisher, pedagogue, teacher. She's going to join us for a review of her Let's Begin piano series. And I'll just read a little bit about what she's sharing, what that entails. The Let's Begin Piano Method series by Deborah Wanless. It's teaching to all learning modalities and personalities can be challenging. This is a series that motivates, inspires, and appeals to a wide range of ages and needs. It's rapidly becoming a must-use piano method for Canadian teachers and their students. And maybe I'll elaborate on that and say also American and maybe even globally. And so we can see her on Friday, April 14th, right here, streaming live on the Conservatory Canada TV YouTube channel and also on Zoom. Watch your inboxes for the registration links for those of you that like to join live and ask questions. If anyone today has any questions, throw them in the Q&A if they're technical, and George and Chris can answer them. Any questions for me, you can throw in the chat box. So they're going to have our attention for about an hour, and answering questions along the way or at the end, and hope you enjoy. Chris and George, I'll turn this over to you. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Well, Chris, it's a pleasure as always to be here with you. If you don't mind, I'd love to have a chance to introduce the books that we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely.
So let me share my screen. There we go. So we're talking about the Microjazz Duet collections, books 1 to 3, which are being published or republished now for the second time. So that's, I guess, the third publication from Boosey and Hawkes. But before this Boosey and Hawkes publication comes out, which you see on the screen, it's actually available in SuperScore on the iPad. And we're going to have a chance to go through many of the pieces today using the SuperScore application. Some of you may be familiar with many of these pieces because the origins of many of them go back quite a number of years to Microjazz Duets, Piano Duets 1, and there was a Duets 2, and then there was more Microjazz Piano Duets 1 and 2. But one of the exciting things is that with the addition that we're going to be showing you today, in addition to all of the original pieces, there are 13 brand new pieces spread out over the course of 3 books. And what I wanted to tell you about was my initial contact with Chris's work, particularly in the case of the Duet collections. I became aware of these publications for the first time in the early 1990s. And back at that time, if you bought the book, you actually got a floppy disk to go along with it. And that floppy disk was known as a GM disk or a GS disk. And it was expected that if you had a Roland digital piano full featured, you could put this disk in and it would play. And Yamaha had a similar full featured digital piano. And so it was a really remarkable tool. But the thing that was astonishing to me was I had gotten involved with MIDI around 1985, and I had been totally unaware of Chris's publications till the early 1990s. And when I opened up my original package of these, I found out that the original pieces were actually published in the 1980s, mid 1980s. And as you can see, the picture of the composer there, he evidently was, you were just a kid, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't changed that much, it has to be said, but yes, I was just a kid. And in fact, Microjazz came out in 1983, but was actually first signed up in 1981. So we're going back over 40 years. And after Microjazz books came out, the solo books, the duet collections were the next thing. So I was asked to write Microjazz duet collections 1 and 2, followed up not that long after by more Microjazz duets 1 and 2. I've always laughed about that because I thought, what could they have done next? Yet more, still, you know what I mean? They had to think of something else. So they eventually reissued them as Microjazz collections and got around that problem of how to name something after more.
And if you get these in SuperScore, you have to keep in mind that the actual title of the new publications is The Microjazz Duets, Piano Duets, and they alphabetize in your SuperScore library under the letter T for the. But in any case, I found the integration of the brand new compositions with the old ones to be really quite fascinating. They blend in very well. The new ones have the same sort of exuberance of a youthful composer. And when you compare the original ones to the later ones, you can see that the original ones have the maturity of the later ones in terms of their construction. So it's a wonderful.
Yes, you might say I haven't really developed.
Either that or you're ageless.
Exactly.
Static,
Exactly.
who knows? So Chris, tell us about the grouping in the first book here.
Yes, I mean, obviously the 3 duet collections are graded, and so the Duets collection 1 is starting at elementary level, and I think it's what I would call grade 1, possibly peaking at grade 2 in terms of UK grading at least. I think it's now called levels in North America, certainly by the RCM. So these are not too hard to play, and I'm glancing at the music over here, and in fact, neither part is particularly hard to play. It's not like there's a teacher part and a student part. It is really for 2 people of equal proficiency, if you like. So that's worth bearing in mind. These are not teacher accompaniments with student parts. They're actually parts for 2 students, or indeed 2 teachers.
And I think that's really a very important part. And very often, if a student doesn't have a duet partner and a parent has had years of piano a long time ago, but can play at elementary level, oftentimes play along with a parent or a grandparent. I mean, I think these are really intended to be enjoyed by a wide range of environments. Well, what are we going to take a look at today, Chris?
Well, the first piece up is the first piece in Duets Collection 1. It's called Simplicity, and I'm just glancing at the music here, and I've got my little piano here, and I'm just going to reach over and go. So it's a very sort of plain little folky kind of tune, and the accompaniment. So it's a very unaffected little piece, and but when you add the accompaniment to it in SuperScore, which is the only place the accompaniments are available at this point in history, so you're hearing them for the first time, and nobody else has heard them since those MIDI file discs first came out all those years ago. I believe, George, this has got like acoustic guitar, bass, and drums, and if we glance at the parts here, they're nylon guitar, fingered bass, vibes, which is nice, and drum kit. So you can see it's quite a nice instrumentation. And I should add, everybody, that the instrumentation of these pieces is widely varied. You've got big band, you've got orchestral things, you've got synthesizer textures. This one here is really like a small acoustic group playing along with the 2 piano parts.
And it should be emphasized that the backing tracks can be turned off, and they're not a requirement for the music to have integrity. The pieces work very fine, just as traditional piano duets.
Exactly.
So
But here's the whole thing. Yeah.
let's listen to the first one, and I'll let the count off play for this first one, so you get a sense that all these pieces have a count off. And when you're practicing your part by yourself and you need to coordinate with the SuperScore playing the other part, the count off is important, but we won't take time with the count off in the subsequent playbacks today. I should interject that of all the pieces we're going to be playing today, this is probably the quietest one in the group. But at any point, if you find that the volume coming back to you in Zoom is a little bit low, just do what you can to increase the output of your computer speakers.
Because there are some heavy metal pieces almost, like heavy rock anyway. And obviously what you want to do is blast those out of your system as loudly as you can.
Absolutely. Is this one of them, or what is
It's, as it happens, no. I mean, this is a more of a kind of rock and roll style. And again, you can see it looks pretty easy, but you're starting to get these characteristic microjazz things, because one of the things about microjazz is you have built-in syncopation. And the rather fascinating left, the secondo part, obviously that's fine, but this. So you've straight away got this kind of accent and then a push. And the tune itself, of course, ends up finishing before the beat each time. So you get that syncopated kind of style. But when you get the full backing going with this, you start to get really a particular style is immediately in evidence.
And I thought it was very clear, Chris, here in the arrangement, that baritone sax was doing that exact syncopation.
That's right. That's right. And you've got a brass section, of course, which builds. So when it gets to the second time round, the brass is playing a different set of parts, if you like, which actually builds the thing into what really sounds like a big band. And what I particularly like is the drums really start to kind of go for it in the second half. One thing George noticed, which is fascinating, I had a genius of a programmer working with me for these, who worked with me for over 30 years. And he did, it's what called quantizing. He didn't tend to quantize the parts. He played the parts in real time. And that, I think, gives the feeling, when you try and play this with SuperScore, you'll discover these feel very natural to play with, because they're not done in a totally machine kind of way. They're actually played very, very well in time, but not in absolutely kind of strict computer time.
What I find for my students, Chris, is that the repeated listening to playing along with the backing tracks provides a musical and rhythmic framework that sounds so natural to the student that the student is just invited into that framework, and it becomes very easy actually to negotiate these syncopated parts.
Yeah. Now, George, if you just play a little bit of the backing track of this without the piano. And you see straight away how straightforward this is. Here it comes. If you stop it there, it makes you want to improvise. In other words, these are very, very suitable, these backing tracks, for jamming around on the chords. And I've given some suggestions in the piano parts for chords, although funny enough, these are not like, there's lots of seventh chords in the backing, but the piano parts largely got open chords. So it's just what I'm saying. It makes me want to try and make stuff up when I hear that backing by itself. So hopefully some students will feel the same way and think the pianos which Mr. Norton's written down is one solution, but there are other solutions as well, which could be sort of jammed on the fly with that backing.
So the composer has invited you to mess around with the music.
Yeah, I mean, I mess around with it. This is only one solution I came with on the day, you might say, in terms of the top lining and the accompaniment. Now, on a horse, this is an interesting one to me because my programmer wasn't just a multi-instrumentalist. He was also very interested in country music, and he was a very good pedal steel player and country guitarist. And some of the pieces of this have got these really kind of specialist guitar parts, which is almost not like anything else. Do you agree, George? There's not much on the market like this in terms of MIDI programming. We've got someone, and all the parts that you're hearing could be played. In other words, he's playing the same as he would play on the instrument. He just happened to trigger it with a keyboard. But using pitch bend and vibrato and all sorts of fancy devices, you end up with an amazing effect. And what we might do with this one, George, if you don't mind, is play a bit of the accompaniment before we hear the piece. So hearing just the backing.
Oops, sorry.
Now with the piano added in. So you can tell that wonderful pitch bending, which is happening in the guitar part, makes it very characteristic of a particular kind of semi-country style. But here it is with. And again, you can tell there's a nice range of dynamics in that, isn't there? That ends really quite gently with the whole group playing a rather sort of witty second beat softly there at the end.
That's right. And what I like in a piece like this is the fact that the backing tracks have been so nicely integrated with the piano part. It's not overwhelming the student and obliterating what they're trying to do. They fit into the ensemble very nicely.
I was very lucky because I wrote, like, Microjazz had backing tracks to it as well, and Microstyles and Connections as well, all done with this person's collaboration. I say this person because he died, 2 or 3 years ago now. And so he's no longer with us, but it's an incredible legacy. Now, Enchanted Castle is also in book one. I brought this one up because it was, until fairly recently at least, a feature of the Associated Board examination Duet syllabus. So I did seminars on the syllabus for the Associated Board, and Enchanted Castle was one of the pieces they asked me to talk about. And this is rather nice. If you look at it, it's rather mysterious accompaniment, and it's starting on the second beat of the bar, but also very open. And so that's a very mysterious thing straight away. And the piece, that's a kind of open E minor. I think I'd call it an E5, then an open D. In other words, no third of the chord, and then you get the C in the bass. So you end up with the C major 7 chord. This is near the end of the first line, What I'm saying is with quite simple means, you're getting quite rich harmonic effects, I think, with this particular piece.
So Chris, if I may, I'd like to show a little bit about how I would coach a student, let's say, who's been assigned to play the secondo part for this.
Sure.
And to take advantage of this SuperScore medium, I would suggest they might want to start by turning off the display of the other part. They have the opportunity then to make the notation larger and really focus on their own task here. And then at this point, go through and take a look at, well, what are the challenges of the right hand? And as you pointed out, there are these blocked fifths here at the beginning. And they might want to just go in and indicate for themselves, well, we're going to need a finger 5 right there on that note. And same idea over here. So let's put a finger 5 there. And of course, if we rather have a different color, we can do that. And then they can go ahead and start marking the thing up. And in doing so, they're processing cognitively important things about the structure of the music and what their task is. And I think that really puts them nicely in charge. And as they want to practice the piece, if they're on an acoustic piano that has no way of being connected to an iPad, they can have a very simple thing, turn off the playback of their own part, and they could even turn off the playback of individual backing tracks if they wish, maybe leave the count on in, turn on a metronome, and then they might have an experience like this playing along. Imagine playing the secondo. And then you could imagine turning off the metronome, bringing in the backing tracks, various things that you can do.
And one thing which is really quite nice, just on the arranging front, is you can bring in, for instance, I would immediately think it'd be quite nice to bring in just the upright bass and then the bass and drums, and not necessarily bring the whole backing in, because the backing's got quite a few elements in it, which actually, I think this piece is quite effective with just bass and drums. And it's just wonderful that you've got the option of doing just that if you want.
Certainly. And you'll notice that as you resize the music, the markings go where the measures go that they're attached to. And if the markings were considered to be training wheels for learning the piece and at some point are not needed, you could, of course, go back into markup mode and delete them. You also have an option in the upper right corner of simply not showing the markups. You can bring back the training wheels, turn off the training wheels. A lot of flexibility here for learning. What have we got here, Chris? Number 9.
Well, this is one which is quite a heavy rock number. And this is where also you start to get some of the things which I talk to students a lot about, and that is articulation. Because the opening tune, so you've got staccato and you've got a slur, and the next. So I'm always saying to students, if you follow the articulation, including the rests, the silences, in other words, very specifically in a piece of like this, you're going to be basically playing the right effect. So here it is with the whole backing going, and you can hear the piano part is very specifically articulated, or the piano parts rather. Wonderful.
Absolutely. And I have to comment, Chris, that it's interesting to think that some of these came out of the 1980s from you and your creative team that you were working with at that time. And a lot of the MIDI backing tracks that I'd found from other publications in the 1990s were put together by people who performed the parts without a sense of, well, what did the score actually ask you to do?
Yes.
In terms of articulations and so forth. And this is really right to the point musically. Well, this is the last one that we were here to show in volume 1. Tell us about Floral Tribute.
Well, I just thought it was nice. There's quite a few pieces in the Duet collections which are really nice ballads, and this is a 3/4 piece. That's a waltz, and it's got lots of rich chords. And I'm just looking at the chords here at the beginning. So that's already kind of got that slightly kind of Satie flavor. French music is a big influence on my writing, I like to think. And this has a kind of French flavor somewhat, but it's got all these lovely ninth chord. That's a ninth chord. The second chord is A minor over G. If you analyze the chords, you discover they're quite unusual and quite jazzy. And then a lovely tune above. So it's just, I like this particular tune, and it's a very typical piece in my kind of ballad style. Also, that's rather nice, isn't the way it gives the students a chance to really build a piece that builds up to a wonderful forte climax near the end there, starting very, very softly and ending up really quite big and quite widespread sonically as well.
So there's a Microjazz Duets collection 2, and I'd like to point out that really the first bullet point on the previous one, I think it said there were 19 pieces. In this one, there's 24. With all of these collections that Chris puts out, the typical thing is quite an abundance of material from which to choose. And in my own studio, I have a lot of fun with that with my students, because I will often give them the task of go home with their SuperScore album, listen to the pieces, and tell me which one they want to work on next.
And it's not always what you think as well. I mean, I just interpreted a little anecdote about this, which I've never forgotten. This wasn't to do with the duet; it was to do with one of the Microjazz solo pieces. But I did a master class. It was in Canada. This is quite a few years ago, and there were a whole lot of students, about 12 years old on average, and then a man in his 50s, and he decided he wanted to play a piece. Actually, it was from Connection. It was called Moonscape. And I said to him, "Why have you chosen this piece?" And he said, "Well, I heard it played about a year ago at a student concert and thought, I want to play that." And he said, at that point, I didn't actually play the piano. So he'd actually heard this piece and thought, I have to learn the piano in order to play this piece. And there he was playing it for the composer a year later in a masterclass. So sometimes, and it was an unusual and quite elusive piece, if you like. And sometimes students don't choose the expected pieces. They might choose an obscure piece harmonically, or something in which you think I wouldn't have known they would have been attracted to that. So the variety of pieces means you've got plenty of options to choose from for students, I think.
And I think that just creates a very positive framework for the whole relationship with the student in their progress, because there's their own initiative that's involved. So we've got 6 pieces that we're going to be looking at. Chris, what do you can you tell us about Jazz Waltz?
Well, the first two, I won't say much about, except these have been very popular pieces from the Microjazz original books for a long time. And in fact, I think Jazz Waltz and the next one were both set pieces for years and years on most examination boards around the world, in Australia, in Canada, and certainly in the UK. So I thought it was quite nice to do a couple of pieces, which is a good chance that people listening today might actually recognize. So Jazz Waltz is one of my oldest pieces, but also works very nicely as a duet. And then we've got the wonderful addition of the backing as well. So that's like that's almost like a little spiritual, isn't it? The chords have got some nice kind of sevenths and ninths lurking in the accompaniment as well, and lovely string parts as well. And the second piece from the book we're playing you is Play It Again. Now this is an interesting case because I've heard this played in master classes quite a lot, and it's a really tricky piece rhythmically. The opening tune is syncopated, but what's particularly tricky is the next bit. Because those offbeats have to be placed very carefully and exactly by the accompaniment student. And what I discovered is when I tried this piece with students and they were struggling with it rhythmically, if I played it in the backing track, they suddenly, many of the times, sort of fell into place. They suddenly realized what it was about, because the piece is a gospel piece. So it's got quite a groove to it, and it's got Hammond organ and everything. So you may be pleasantly surprised to hear what this sounds like when you hear the full backing.
And I'll just interject there, Chris, that I think that it's important to realize that learning through listening is just as important as learning through reading. And we don't learn to read or to speak a language out of a textbook. There's an awful lot of listening that goes into that learning process, and the same thing happens here.
Also, a good practice for the students to actually have a built-in slowdown in the sequence. The slowdown is pretty much what I want it to be like, but you're having to follow something which is actually slowing down for you. So that's another little kind of, it's not just playing the strict time, it's actually playing something which changes tempo as well.
That's a great term, Chris, a slowdown. In the old days, people used to call it a retardando.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a modern guy. And I noticed somebody in Derek, I think, has put out that Play It Again is often played in swing eights, and I think that's another point that comes up in master classes where teachers say to me, "Can I play it again in swung eights?" And I say, "You could," although if you hear the backing track, you realize it is as far as you can get from a swung eights piece. It's in a very much so it's very much a straight eights with a gospel feel and a kind of snare drum on the third beat of the bar. Now, insistence. This is a very interesting case. I don't know where I got this from, but look at this fascinating left hand of the primo part. What? And then on top of that, you've got a tune. So you're actually creating a little melody through almost all repeated notes. And then you've got this lovely riff. And the piece, because it's got so many repeated notes, it's got built-in momentum. It keeps on feeling like it's building and ends up exploding with this. You see halfway through the bar, and happens twice. So the piece can't help but build. So I love the backing of this as well. So here's insistence with the full band going. And again. So that really brings the house down. If you did that with a backing track fed through some kind of speaker and had two students playing that, it's an instant applause piece, isn't it, George? You can tell. Absolutely. Because it's got that kind of da 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 da, and the audience will think, I hope that comes back, and it does.
And I found it actually rather interesting that because of those repeated notes in the primo, that obviously they're just being repeated, it gives a chance for that rhythmic feature of the left-hand secondo to come out every other bar and make a statement. And yeah. So as a player, I think you get an opportunity to be, a little bit of a soloist every other measure there in your left hand, which is kind of neat.
And Derek has made a very good point here in the comments, and that is the backing tracks help to clarify the intended style, because that's one of the things I found really amazing. I wrote these pieces, having played in many band contexts, if you like, and I had at the back of my mind what the style was, but I had a wonderful arranger working with me, and he just pulled out exactly what I had in mind. And I was saying to George earlier today that one of the big influences on him, there were two big influences actually. One of them was Steely Dan, and another was Tower of Power. Now, not everybody will know the names of both of those bands, but what I'm saying is the range of influences, instrumentation was very, very interesting and quite wide. And in fact, the guy whose name was Frank Meisen, by the way, the guy who did the backings with me, his first professional engagement was playing trombone on a tour of Europe by the Jackson 5. So he kind of had an R&B and soul overtone, but he also was asked at one point if he'd like to join Queen as their bass player. And he said, no, I've got my own thing going. So he turned it down. But he was on the fringes of the big time as all of his life, if you like. But that's why I think that point about the backing tracks having to clarify the style is absolutely true, because this person played live and ensembles as a trombone player, as a bass player, as a guitar player, and knew the sounds and the styles from the inside.
So, Chris, would a student who wants to study the style of this next piece look it up under train or under blues? Well,
in fact, you look it up under boogie, if anything, because that pattern, the baby elephant walk pattern, as they call it, has always been a very popular staple of solo piano blues literature, if you like. And this has been a popular piece ever since it first came out in the Microjazz solo books, I think, but it makes a nice little duet as well. So that's a terrific instrumentation. I particularly like the use of muted trumpets in that, but also the whole trombone section of bending the notes as they play their chords in the accompaniment as well. So that's a great one to put the backing on for. Now, Beachfront, which is also in book 2, is one of my favorite pieces just because it's such a lovely tune. It's a very sort of outward-looking Caribbean-style piece. And this has not just drums. If we just look quickly, George, at what the band instrumentation is, look at that: baritone sax, muted trumpet, trombone, brass section, rock organ, drum kit, fingered bass. So it's quite a big section, and the drums kit includes percussion as well. And so it's a really terrific effect. And I think this is also, it's a little bit like Jamaican Rumba by Arthur Benjamin. Some of you will know that. And it's in that kind of vein. It's kind of classic rumba style. Secondo. Again, one that'll bring the house down if that's played very well together, which I've heard many excellent performances of this by quite young players, and they really do a great job. But with the backing, it really is a terrific effect.
Yeah, and there's two wonderful spots in there to point out the use of 5/5 chord, albeit an extended one, but the dominant of the dominant.
Absolutely.
Bar 28 there has just a lovely effect in the piece, I think. Well, we've got one more here to show in this book.
Yes, this is the last one we're showing you in book 2. Again, this is one of these really, what do you call it, ballad-like pieces. And I think this is a very sweet piece. And also, for the first time, we've got some changes of time signature. It's going from 4/4 to 6/8. And I just love the effect. We go da da dee da 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 da, and it's quite naturally suddenly flows into a feeling of 6. So here's Solitude from book 2. So I particularly like the piece suddenly goes into fifths, but there's also all sorts of. That's a B flat major with a sharp 11th. What I mean is some of the chords in this are getting really quite unusual. And what I like about my own writing, you might say, is I do rove about the spectrum stylistically, but also harmonically. And composers, you just suddenly you think, I like the sound of that. You don't necessarily even need to know what the chord is. But the backings, I think, and the way it's presented here on SuperScore really kind of bring out those harmonic niceties and nuances.
I will have to say that you really did slip that 6/8 in there so smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, the lister accepts it quite happily. I think that it's suddenly you could almost have stayed in 6/8 at that point, and that's quite a jazz thing, I think, to do that. So now we're on to the exciting world of book 3. And the first piece in book 3, I mean, you can see that the same elements are mentioned in terms of articulation, ensemble, performing in front of an audience, present an order of difficulty, and so on. The first piece up is one of the most spectacular in the whole of the Duet collection series. And
before I show it,
yeah.
I don't want to go over, slide over the next to last bullet point here, but the fact that the piano parts were recorded by the composer, I think, is an especially meaningful thing for the student. When they're at home practicing without their duet partner present, Chris will be there to play along 24/7.
Yeah, and I recorded them years ago, but I can still recognize my own style of playing. So it's quite nice to hear them back and thinking, yeah, that's kind of what I meant. Now, this is a great piece. And what we might do, George, if you play a bit of it with the full backing and then switch the pianos off and hear a bit of the backing without the piano, because this is extraordinary, this piece. Okay, now here's the backing only. Especially this. And so on. Now, one thing which I've never forgotten, this guy, Frank, he did various other jobs with me. And one of the things he did, which I've never, ever understood how he did it, was he did a couple of Stevie Ray Vaughan albums in MIDI, where he copied all the guitar solos. And the publishers just couldn't believe it when they got it. They just, because it was identical, but it wasn't played on a guitar. It was all being played on a keyboard with pitch bend and modulation wheel and so on. So you can hear the guitar part of this. It's really quite extraordinary. It's a very fast pitch bend going on, all sorts of things. You won't really hear anything like this anywhere else, I don't think. Yeah, so that is a masterwork of programming, I think. And we're going straight on to Springboard, which is another one of my favorite pieces. I just love the effect of the feel of this. And often people say to me, you know, what are your influences as a composer? I say, I like things which have got a groove. And I played mostly in R&B and soul bands when I was much younger. And I love the idea of something which has got a particular feel. And this certainly has it, I think, Springboard. Now, it's interesting that and the previous piece have quite a funk influence, which is a particular music style which I played a lot of. And one of the pieces which I've never forgotten is one of my most popular solo pieces is called Intercity Stomp. It's been on examination boards ever since the 80s, and children just love it. And when I got the backing track for this done, the first time around, I was using a particular program, and he didn't. And I thought, I recognized the feel of that, and I realized that, in fact, it was Beat It by Michael Jackson. was the kind of springboard for the style. And I think there's an element of which, if you were clever enough, you could trace back where the original inspiration for the piece was. But I wrote them originally as solo piano pieces or as duets, and the backings were put on later. And so it's fascinating that somebody dug deep and figured out what I had in the back of my mind when I wrote the original piece. Now, Snake Charmer is just, I like having these pieces which are kind of character pieces, and this is a little kind of slightly Middle Eastern piece for piano duet. Now, how many MIDI sequences do you come across, George, which have got a fade out?
Not very often.
It's a lovely effect, isn't it? Where you actually, it says repeat several times, fading away, and we've managed to make it fade away.
We certainly did. Chris, when we bring up the next one, I would just like to point out that for those students who do have a MIDI capable instrument, whether it's a digital piano, a keyboard of some sort, or even an acoustic piano that has MIDI capability, they do have an option to go into the interactive playback modes. In the learning mode, they can choose which part is going to be followed, meaning the part that they're going to play, primo or secondo. And then when they're in that mode and they start playback, the moving cursor is not going to move, and you're not going to hear the next note of the backing tracks until you've played your own note correctly. And so it's a way of verifying all week long that you are in fact learning the right notes. In jam mode, the program will wait for you to play your first note, so you've had time to get your hands off the iPad and onto your keyboard and ready to play. But then after that, you've got to keep up. And in perform mode, it will actually follow your tempo if that was an appropriate thing to do, to play with some varied tempo. So you have a number of options there. And here we've got some metrical changes that are going to be taking place.
Again, I don't know where I got those harmonies at the end from, but I do like them still.
Who knew that 12/8 and 6/4 could blend so well together simultaneously?
That's right. That's right.
Remarkably well done.
Just a very there's a number of pieces in the duet collections which are in these lovely kind of Caribbean stroke Latin American styles with very nice easy tunes and interesting accompaniments which aren't too hard to play. So here's Rio Nights, which I just think is a little charming piece for duet students to play in public. Lovely. I like that ending. And this is the final piece we're going to play. I just thought this was a great piece to finish off because it is so a madcap a piece. I'm not quite sure where I got it from, why it's called Zoot Suit or anything, but it's in a sort of shuffle time in 12/8, and you can see it's quite complex rhythmically. But again, with the backing track, I think students would start to kind of piece together what this piece means quite quickly.
Well, Chris, I have to say there are some of us who would love to see you show up at the next conference in a Zoot suit. So,
exactly. I mean, I'm sure it would suit me well, whatever it is. That's right. I like the fact that the piece ends on a push, so it actually ends before the beat there. And again, that's a great little thing for a student to learn how to do because it's training them well for school jazz bands or whatever. So that's the whole of the duet collections, and these wonderful backings are only available worldwide on SuperScore at the moment. So it's certainly something very interesting to add to these books, which have been out for a long time and which have been enjoyed for a long time, which have been given, I think, a real new lease of life through this partnership with TimeWarp.
So we should mention that if you wanted to find Chris's print publications at Boosey and Hawkes, the website is here on this slide, boosey.com. Chris has many other publications that he publishes on his own at 80 Days Publishing. You can see all of his available SuperScore albums at TimeWarpTech.com, but I should emphasize that his SuperScore albums cannot be purchased at TimeWarp. You actually have to download the free SuperScore app on your iPad and then go and tap on the shopping cart button in the upper left corner of the screen, and that takes you into the store where there are many different publishers. You'll find Chris's Norton Connections music under CN Connections as a publisher. The pieces that we were showing you today are found in the Boosey and Hawkes category.
At the bottom under the.
The bottom,
That's right.
because it's not Microjazz Duets collections. They are the Microjazz Duets collection. Not just any old duets that are Microjazz. There's the Microjazz Duets.
You can see there's a lot of books there on SuperScore, so there are a lot of things to look at as well, all of which are lovely backing tracks.
Absolutely, and there is more to come, including some pieces for solo instrument and piano. We're going to be coming out with very soon the concert collection for flute as an example. So a lot of exciting things yet to come from Christopher Norton and SuperScore.
Awesome. And most of the repertoire that you saw there in the SuperScore library, they've presented or Chris has presented in the past. Some of those webinars are available on the CCTV YouTube channel. Chris has his own dedicated playlist within that channel that you can see all the previous webinars that he's done, or most of them. Some of them we may duplicate here in the coming months if you two are open to it, and I'm sure you are.
Indeed.
Give us more from the micro jazz, micro rock, micro Latin, micro ballads is a really good one. I use that one a lot with my students as well. And of course, micro swing. And I know there's so many other things there, but it's nice to see them going up on SuperScore bit by bit. And there's quite a library there now. Any questions from anyone? I don't see anything listed in the Q&A or in the chat box at this moment, but if anyone has anything quick, feel free to type that in there, or you can raise your hand. We can always bring you on live. And you can ask your question if you don't feel like typing, or you have a limitation to type, you've got a burning question. It's a great presentation, both of you. Thanks for going through so much detail. It's great to hear these backing tracks. And I'm just more and more convinced all the time on their validity and how they can help students understand what's really intended, as I said in the chat box there. Okay, not seeing any questions. Do you guys have anything else last minute to add?
Well, I have a quick question for Chris.
Yeah.
You are well known for traveling extensively and living extensively in various countries of the British Commonwealth. Yet you've written a number of pieces like the Rio, what was the name of it?
Rio Nights, I think, was it?
Rio Nights, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
In South America, and I was curious whether you've ever spent any time there, or whether this piece like that shows your aspiration to go there.
My aspiration, I think, yeah. I've done some seminars to Brazil, and they've invited me to go, but I haven't been to South America or Central America. I've never been to Mexico either. But I should add in passing that there are quite a few things which people in the know would realize are New Zealand connections. I'm from New Zealand originally. A very nice duet in the collections is called Tip Top, which is New Zealand's favorite ice cream make. So I do sometimes bring up New Zealand. I didn't do buzz bars, but I could have done that, you know, and licorice all sorts. But of course, that's not just New Zealand, but that's another title for a piece in a connections book. So I do make references to where I came from originally from time to time. But yes, it's aspirational, quite a lot of the titling, well, including the zoot suit.
I do appreciate the fact that the pieces you composed in New Zealand, you have printed upright. Does make it easier to read.
Exactly.
What kind of flavor is Tip Top? How do you describe this flavor?
Well, vanilla. It's the best flavor. That's not much of an answer, is it?
So it's always changing in some ways?
Yeah, it's always changing. I have one lovely ice cream story from New Zealand to tell you, though, because one of the best flavors in New Zealand ice cream is boysenberry. And I took my children to New Zealand for the first time when my daughter, I think, was probably about 8 at the time. And I said, you must try boysenberry ice cream. And she, I bought one for her, and she took her first bite, and there was a dead wasp in it. So she spent the rest of her life thinking, I'm not really that keen on boysenberry ice cream as an idea, you know.
Oh, that's terrible, but funny. Jeez. Okay, well, thanks both of you. Thanks everyone for being here today on the YouTube channel and here on Zoom. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks. Chris and George, thanks for your time, and we hope to have you back again soon.
Great.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.